it's always turned out okay. I've given it my best, and it's usually been enough, even if behind the scenes, as you will know, running your own events, sometimes behind the scenes there's like some panicked fixing of things that are going wrong. But from an audience perspective, when you're a delegate watching, you'd never know that had happened.
Welcome to Events Demystified podcast, where we explore and demystify the world of in-person, virtual, hybrid event AV production and technology by sharing insightful tips, tricks and tactics to make your events a success. This podcast is brought to you by Trifan Events, a woman-owned boutique event production agency. And your host is Anca Trifan, a technical event planner and producer with almost 2 decades of hands-on technical experience in event production.
Welcome to another episode of Events Demystified podcast, your one-stop shop for tangible, technical, and planning advice for anyone in the events industry. Today's episode is sponsored by Trifan Events, a woman-owned boutique event production agency, and I am your host, Anca Trifan. On the show with me today, I have Annette Jukes, the owner of Small Prints, a graphic designer for print, digital, and live events, a PowerPoint expert, content manager, and event strategist. She worked in publishing, web and multimedia, and promotional design before becoming a freelancer 12 years ago. Her experience covers all aspects of design, from brand development and advertising to shop interiors. Learn more about Annette by following the links in the episode notes. And in the meantime, let's welcome her in. Welcome to the podcast, Annette. How are you doing on the other side of the world?
Hi, Anca. Thanks for having me. I'm very well, thank you. We're having a heat wave in the UK, so all is very happy here.
Well, heat wave sounds like not a very happy thing, though. Why is that a happy day in UK?
Because it rains so much in Britain, so we're always happy for a bit of extra sunshine.
I love it. I feel like we've had quite a few heat waves with temperatures in 105. And I know that's Fahrenheit and not Celsius. So don't ask me like what that is translating in Celsius. I used to know, right? Like coming from Europe, you think I would still remember. Not anymore. But it was pretty high. Okay. It was pretty hot. At least, you know, what we're dealing with is a dry heat versus like a humid heat, which is just not my cup of tea as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, it's been lovely here, but not as hot as you guys get over there in the US. Yeah, you're kind of more nearing the 40 degrees there, I think, in Celsius, which is very warm indeed. But you're set up, right? Because you have the air conditioning, you're all on. We haven't got any of that here, so we're either hot and sweltering or we're in the rain. And it's two extremes for us.
Well, we haven't seen each other since we worked on an event in San Francisco a few months ago. Anything exciting has happened since then?
Oh, I'm trying to think. So I've had a week off, as I was just saying to you.
That's exciting.
Yeah, that's great. A technical free week. So it was a no phones, no laptops, complete disconnect from the world, which was lovely, in the countryside near the coast, near Cromer in the UK, which is beautiful. And just a lot of peace and quiet. So it's been really nice. As far as jobs goes, I can't remember what I've done. It's been busy, but it's just about to ramp up again soon. So I will be off to Milan to do some work in a week or two's time, which is doing some speaker content management. And then I'm going to do some presentation graphic support in Paris, followed by some show calling in Gothenburg. So it's all to come.
I love that you're traveling so much and you're seeing all these wonderful destinations. So I can't wait to dive into the conversation today, which honestly, it's a complete treat because I rarely get the pleasure and the opportunity to talk with another event professional that I've worked with on the same event that is also a female, you know. So first thing first, what I want to know and what our audience would love to learn more about is a bit of your background story. How did you get where you are today? And what are some of the things that you're most passionate about when it comes to the things that you're doing today?
Okay, so as you said in your lovely introduction, I've worked in graphic design for more than 20 years now, and I started off in publishing. And then I moved into freelancing, sadly, after being fired, which was kind of a down point of my career, but also an up point because it made me decide to start my own business.
It made you spread your wings.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And quite early on, I worked at an agency who did live events, but I was just working in their studio. And fortunately for me, a graphics tech pulled out of a job and they approached me and asked, did I know how to do PowerPoint? Could I run presentations? Because there was a job in Monaco that they needed help with. And at that time, I'd never worked away. I'd never traveled for work. I'd never worked in the live event forum. But I was so excited by the opportunity that I just nodded along and went, yeah, I can do that. Absolutely. I'd love to. And they signed me up, booked me a flight, and I had a couple of days to prepare, went off, did that first live event, and haven't looked back. That was 12 years ago.
So back then you didn't necessarily have like YouTube so much to like learn, all the tricks and tips about how to do this, especially since you were pretty much of a rookie at that point, right? Yeah. So what did you do? Like, did you just get like PowerPoint for Dummies, or what did you do to learn today's time?
So I was really lucky there was a more experienced operator there as well. So I was kind of a backup on that first show. But it was just a couple of days of frantic Googling and just going into PowerPoint and experimenting with things. With a graphic design background, I knew what things should look like,
yeah.
but I wasn't as familiar with the technical running.
With the running of it.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Why I feel like that's fascinating is because as women, we don't necessarily put ourselves in positions and comfortable positions unless we're like 100% almost sure that we can run whatever it is that it's, required of us. And for you to sort of like just, say, hey, I'm totally down for this, even though in your mind you knew that you're not necessarily 100% ready. The fact that you took that chance and you had the courage to say yes, I feel like it's something that a lot of women don't do because we want to be prepared. We want to be sure that when we are put in a position, we're really, really knowledgeable of what we need to do. So tell me, what is the secret ingredient for someone to really get outside of their comfort zone and say yes when the opportunity comes, and then, go back and like learn whatever it is that, you need to figure out things and find out, what it is that is necessary or required, and just go and do it?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I always tell myself when someone offers me a job or a position where I think I'm not sure I've got all the skills or I tick all the boxes for that yet. The first thing is, if the worst happens, you can always go home. Right? And you've got your family there, you've got your support system, you've got your friends. You can go out, you can have a gin with your girlfriends and say, oh my God, I did this job, it went terribly, and they sacked me and I've come home.
And you have a story.
Yeah, that's going to be the worst possible scenario. So I kind of told myself that on the first one. If the worst comes to the worst, I'll just go home and then, have a little cry about it and pick myself back up. But thankfully that didn't happen. I think if you've got a bank of skills, you've got a skill set, and you're prepared to ask questions from people that do know, and you're not embarrassed to say, I don't know how to do this. Can somebody help me? Especially in a freelance environment. A lot of people are very happy to share their skills. They want the whole team to succeed. Everyone's got your back. And there's always going to be somebody on site that knows more than you. So it's being open to learning from others, but also then helping others when they're in that position too, and supporting your other crewmates. And I've forgotten the rest of the question.
I love that. I love the fact that you are okay with going through failure, because a lot of people, I feel like, and women and men alike, they fear failure. They fear that worst case scenario, right? But if you mentally walk into it thinking, okay, so what's the worst that can happen? If this happens, I can deal with it. I feel like that's mental strength, because even if you've been in the situation before and you know that you bounce back, or you haven't, being prepared to put up with it, I think it's resilience, and it's great that you are able to get back on your feet, after, something that might have gone terribly wrong. So I guess my follow-up question to the first one, has something happened? Has something gone terribly wrong? And what was your strategy to get back on your feet?
Actually, I've been very lucky, and I'm prepared to say I've never had a disaster. It's always turned out okay. I've given it my best, and it's usually been enough, even if behind the scenes, as you will know, running your own events, sometimes behind the scenes there's like some panicked fixing of things that are going wrong. But from an audience perspective, when you're a delegate watching, you'd never know that had happened. So most of them have been fine. I think there's a few that have been a little bit hairy, or might have been out of my skill set, or maybe one in particular that comes to mind was a very difficult job that was seriously undercrewed. And as a graphics operator with experience, I was expected to run 8 to 10 laptops on my own, which, as you know, with 2 hands, it's a tricky ask. And it was very long hours and quite a demanding end client. So that was probably a difficult one. But again, all you can do is give it your best, which is what we all did. And the show pulled off. And some of the nicest experiences I've had and some of the best shows I've done have been the ones I've been the most scared to go to. I did a show in Australia and I had to travel there alone. And, that's obviously like the opposite side of the world for me. So that was quite worrying. I've been to Asia to work where there's a language barrier. I've recently worked in Portugal with a crew based in Portugal. And again, there was a language barrier and, a difference of understanding. But it's always been enjoyable. And I've always met great people when I've been there that have been really supportive.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like you've definitely traveled a lot, and I can't wait to hear also what was maybe your favorite destination. And since you've been in the live event environment for quite some time now, and work with so many different type of crew members and techs and engineers as well as presenters, I'm curious, what's the secret sauce to getting along with so many different type of people? And some of them, let's be honest, could have some intense personalities, right?
Yeah. I think a genuine interest in people. I'm always really intrigued to find out why people work in this industry, how they learn their role, how they got into it, because I don't think it's necessarily a career that you immediately think of when you're studying or when you're younger. I think a lot of people come into events via an odd route. So everyone's got a great story to tell. Patience, obviously. For me, it's getting enough sleep. If you go too many days without enough sleep, then my patience level is less. So that makes it harder if you're dealing with difficult people. Keep smiling. Be someone that brings coffee. I think everyone appreciates the coffee, and that helps to smooth things over backstage.
But you never have enough coffee backstage. That's all I'm going to say.
And I think I found the most difficult techs are sometimes technically the most clever, though. So if you can't appreciate, maybe you've got a personality clash. If you can't appreciate someone else's personality, because we're all different, maybe you can look at, but I really appreciate they're great at what they do. And what they're adding to this event is an amazing, technical knowledge. And, they're just brilliant behind the scenes. And that's enough. I can kind of see those positives in the different people I work with. I'm like, he's great at this, or she's brilliant at that, or this person's excelling there. Everyone's got something to add, and it's just finding that great point and then focusing on that while you're there.
I think that's a great perspective, because let's be honest, many techs, they're not necessarily people's person. So it can certainly be a little bit of you're really used to working alone and in a sort of like a dark cave, and
windowless room,
and you're doing a really, really good job at that, but like interacting with other people, probably not your best skill. Piggybacking on that, do you think that the quality of an event production has any correlation with how well a tech crew gets along?
I think it makes a difference, definitely. Does it make a difference to the audience? I'm not sure, because I think if everyone is aware of their role and they've got a level of experience, we all know what's expected of us, we're able to kind of seamlessly work together as a team. So I don't think an audience would necessarily notice. But I think if you're working with crew that you're friends with, that you've worked with a lot, that you've got a repertoire with, maybe you can catch and make things easier when there are mistakes or when there's more challenging things going on. you know who to ask for what. You know there are certain people that will just step in and fill a role, or you can wave someone over frantically and say, come help me with this, I need an extra pair of hands. And you know who those people are. So you've got a shorthand that you might not have if you're working with a crew that you haven't worked with before.
I couldn't agree more. I think at least, if anything, the takeaway is you would have a good, enjoyable behind the scenes experience, in the long hours and the position that you're in. And many times, we know how, before the event and after the event, we work very long hours. It's not just the event day and the event time line. So I tend to agree with that. Having someone that you've worked with before or someone that you have a good rapport with, it's always more enjoyable than having to sort of like work your way through, some personality challenges or differences. So I guess as a freelancer, because it's something that you have done for quite a bit now as a graphic designer, which makes you an expert at this kind of work, I would love to talk about presentation, graphics, tips and tricks and shortcuts and do's and don'ts. So let's get right into this and maybe share your top tips for speakers when creating their own presentations for use at a live event.
Okay, so I've put a few things together here. Stop me if I get on a roll. So the first one's really simple. Tell a story and keep it simple. I can't stress that enough. That's the first point. The second one is to use visuals for the screen and use words for the presentation. So ideally, you just want supporting pictures behind you and then the story to come out verbally as you speak. You don't want to be reading words off of a slide, which is complex. It's difficult for the audience to see and it's not very engaging. Another point when you're creating your presentation from the beginning is to check the screen size. Now, more and more now, as you'll know, events are having custom size LED walls and they look amazing and the graphics on them are fantastic. But you want your presentation to look its absolute best on that. So make sure that you check with the event organizer what format they would like those slides in, because you might find you can use something which is double width, make a really great looking presentation, but you're actually only utilizing a small part of the screen because you've done it a normal size. Another thing that I think is important is use of color. And there's quite a few things to kind of cover here. One is using contrast. So you want light text on a dark background or dark text on a light background. What you don't want is lots of pale pastel shades, because depending on how they are shown on screen, which might be by projection or might be by LED wall, they're going to look different. And if they're very pale or very tinted, you can lose those colors altogether. So you certainly don't want a pale blue on a white background text to read, because it's likely to disappear entirely once you're on stage.
So if those are some of your brand colors, say, what's a way to work around brand colors that don't necessarily match your presentation? Because I know a lot of presenters that would love to keep their presentation on point with what their brand colors are, but it just happens that their brand colors is like a super light green, a super light pink, a super light whatever, and you're like, this does not look the same on, like you said, either a projection screen or an LED screen.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally, like, we would hope that a well-designed brand has got at least one dark color in the palette. But like you're saying, if it's all lights and there isn't one, usually there are some rules that can be bent so that they can maybe use their lighter colors on a black, as long as it's just a black and it's not a color. So then I'd recommend using a black background or a very dark gray and using those lighter pastel shades for what you're putting on top of that dark background so that you can still see them. Or things like applying shadows to them or an outline on some of the shapes, just that might be a darker color or a darker tint of that pastel so that it will pop off a little more, would help with those kind of weaker pastel-y brand colors.
Do you happen to have a lot of presentations that come across your desk where right before, the rehearsal day, you're like, oh my goodness, I have so much work to do on this, on redesigning it, or maybe changing fonts or changing colors, or just all together like recreating this presentation that was basically brought to you on a thumb drive, and you're like, or maybe sent via Dropbox or one of the, cloud storage services, and you're like, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah, like all the time, last minute things. Sometimes it'll be that they've done it in 4:3, which, as you know, is like a kind of older.
I can't believe people
format.
still do that.
Yeah. And so they're all of the slides are a little bit too truncated and everything needs making widescreen. So that's, not ideal. So that actually brings me to another tip, though, which is use master slides. Let me tell you why it's a good idea to use them. Because if somebody has to reformat them for you, or if you need to make a change to your deck that needs to be on every slide, let's say, Anca, you've done your PowerPoint presentation and you've put your logo on the master slide, and then you decide, oh, it's the wrong logo or it's the wrong color, I need to change it. If you've put it on the master, you can swap that out on the master slide and it will update all of the other slides in the presentation that have come from that master automatically. So if you've got a 200 slide presentation and you're giving that to me 20 minutes before you go on stage, that is a quick change. If, however, you've decided to manually paste that logo onto every single slide separately, that has to be replaced on every single slide separately. So it makes changing and editing much, much faster if you just use a master in the first place.
So if you don't know what's a master slide, would you just go back one step and explain that?
Sure. So when you create a PowerPoint presentation, you can go into the view menu and you can view slide master. And in there, you'll find one large slide. And then underneath it, some different layouts, which are your kind of submasters for that set. If you edit those 6 or 8 slides in there to the layouts that you want, like you can change the font on those, you can pop your logo onto the larger slide, and it will then show up on everything, all the slides underneath it. When you go back into view and normal, and you start to pull down your different layouts from the menu in PowerPoint, you've probably got one that says title, title plus content, or title to column. They will all include the changes you've made to the master. So the logo will be on all of those slides as you build through your PowerPoint. The great thing about that as well is when you paste these things across presentations, they'll pick up certain formatting from other templates. If you're using those slides, let's say you're using them across your business, but you've got several PowerPoint templates on the go, it will pick up the color palette from another master as you paste it in. So you won't have to manually format things when you're reusing content.
So I'm curious then on the naming of those master slides and the many versions, if you go through a lot of changes, because many times, I would have some content that comes to me as final, and then there's final, and then there's final. I'm like, which one is the latest version final? Do you have any guidelines on that?
Yeah, so naming conventions is something that I wanted to cover, actually, especially when you're providing content to an events team or to an individual and they're compiling it all for you ahead of an event. Let's say that you have got 10 people speaking on day 1 and 10 people speaking on day 2. My advice would be, and this is how I label my own files for events, that you label with, if you're the speaker. So if I was speaking, I would label my file Annette Jukes, an underscore, the session I was speaking about, so probably PowerPoint design, and then I'd give it my initials and a version number. So Annette Jukes, PowerPoint design, AJV01. And I'd send it to you, Anca, and then you would save that. Now, if I edit it in the meantime before coming to the event and I'm sending it to you again, I would change that version number to 02. It sounds very, very obvious, and it's the easiest thing to do, but the amount of presenters that will send you a file 5, 6, 7 times as they change it with the same file name.
Yeah.
Means
what about date? Do you care about date at all?
I don't put a date on it normally because the version should be enough. And if the file name is kept fairly short like that, as you throw those files into a folder and view them as a list, they're going to sit in order. So the higher version number is going to be lowest down. You can read down 2, 3, 4, 5. Where's my highest version number? Yeah. And you know that's the one you should be using.
And as a technician, as you're receiving those and you're potentially making changes and relabeling?
Yes. So then I would number them. Usually I just number 0, 1. So if I'm doing day 1, I'll label them 0, 1 through 10. And then for the same event, day 2, I just carry on. So day 2 would be 11, 12, 13, 14, up to 20. If I send back to presenters, again, I version up, but I change their initials to mine and version up a number, send it back, and then allow them to send it back to me with that same process.
I love it.
Does that make sense?
That absolutely. And that kind of sort of goes into this content management topic that I wanted to touch into anyway, with, some suggestions when it comes to compiling the files that do make a difference. And I would love to know if you have any other tips on how can event teams manage their content more effectively before handing, over their content to the technical team.
Yeah, so I think, like we were saying, if you label with the name in the session, that makes it easier straight away. Something to check if you are a member of an events team dealing with speakers providing content is whether they have got video or sound clips in their presentations. And if they do have that, it's really important that you ask for the source files for those videos. The reason for that is sometimes the files get really big or the PowerPoint won't play that video when they come to it. And most event technical setups will allow for video playback to be done from a separate machine, which maybe is a backup, because if it's in your presentation and it works, we'll just let you roll with that. But if it's not, the team will have it in a backup machine. So if it doesn't work when you're on stage, you can call for it and say, I'm going to show you a video now about an astronaut, and the techs are listening and we're picking up and we're like, oh, it hasn't played out the PowerPoint, and we'll roll it separately for you and the audience will never know it didn't work. So that's why we asked for those source files separately. Another thing to think about is fonts. If you've used a system font, that's great. If you're chasing content from speakers, check with them. Did you use a company font? If it's not going to be a typical Microsoft or Mac font, you're going to need a copy of that. Otherwise, it won't display correctly on the screen. So you need to request that as well.
Do you have sort of like a checklist template that you like to send to your speakers to say, okay, here are the things that are appropriate, for your presentation to look like, suggestions, obviously. And then here are the things that we would love to receive with your presentation, including those fonts and source files and any other things that you can think of?
Yeah, I think there's just a couple of other bits. Like I would always request the actual PowerPoint file. Sometimes people want to send a PDF or they want to send you a link to Google Slides. Again, the reason that we'll ask for the PowerPoint file in its entirety is because if you do want to make a last minute change, that can be done on site. We can just fix it. If it's broken, we'll step through that before you come for your rehearsal. We'll make sure it's functioning correctly. A PDF doesn't allow us to make any changes. It's very static. It has to be played out a different way, so it's not ideal. So yeah, that's better. If you give a Google Slides link, which might work in a rehearsal when there's one person in the room, as we both know, when you've got 2,000 delegates on that Wi-Fi the next day, that Google Slides link, and that internet connection is not going to be as stable. So really, we want to have the actual file on a local machine. It just makes more sense, and it's a better way for us to run your presentation. A final point for that would be, I would always ask presenters to check the size of the content they're putting into their presentation. There's some really great image libraries now with free resources and amazing photography that people can use for their presentations. But those file sizes tend to be gigantic. So if you've made 50 slide presentation, or with beautiful graphics from Unsplash or Pixabay or something like that online, it could be a massive file size. And what we want is to just optimize it. So when you're clicking through, if you're doing that at speed, we're not waiting for it to transition from slide to slide. Even more important for hybrid and virtual, because you're running it over the internet.
I love it. And any tips on how you could optimize that yourself if you don't have an expert to do it for you?
Absolutely. So there is a function for that in PowerPoint, and I'm just very quickly going to open that so I can tell you the exact name.
Go for it.
I can't do it without looking at it. Yes, absolutely. So a really easy way to do that, if you haven't got any software to kind of shrink those pictures down, is you can do it in PowerPoint. So if you go and into your deck and select an image that you've put in there, and you look underneath the menu picture format, there's an option that says compress pictures. If you click on that, it's going to bring up another window, and it's going to give you an option to choose the picture quality for all the pictures in your presentation. So it's usually set to high fidelity, maximum PPI, which means it's going to be as big as the image you've put in. So that's going to be maybe massive. You can choose to reduce that down to HD. So find out, screen sizes. If you're doing an HD presentation, you want to leave it on HD, which is 330 PPI. Otherwise, you can do on screen, which is about half of that, 150. So that's going to reduce the size of your presentation like quite dramatically. So you'd click that to select it. There's also a tick box, which is for delete cropped areas of pictures. So where they're not shown, it gets rid of the excess of the image. And then you can apply it to all the pictures in the file, or just the pictures you've selected if you know which ones are the larger ones. Click OK, and that will immediately shrink them down throughout your whole presentation, hopefully making it run a bit faster.
That's an amazing tip right there, golden. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to use that as a promo tool, just so you know, for the podcast when it's time to go on air. But AJ, hold that thought, because we're going to take just a brief moment to acknowledge our podcast sponsor and supporter, and we'll be right back with more tips and more tricks for making your presentation the best presentation that there can be right there. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Before we move any further, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our main sponsor, Trifan Events, which is a boutique event planning and production agency that will come alongside you, offering personalized event planning and technical support, strategic event design, production and technology management, and flawless execution for live, virtual, and hybrid events. The team at Trifan Events is passionate about planning and producing event experiences that get people involved with true moments of interaction, engagement, and co-creation, while offering white glove treatment throughout the entire planning process, enabling you to reach your event goals with the use of creativity, production tools, and event technology. Find out how Trifan Events can plan and produce your event become memorable. Go to trifanevents.com. Welcome back to our conversation with Annette Jukes about everything that has to do with graphic design and PowerPoint presentations that will make you look great when on stage. So, Annette, what should a graphic designer do when something unexpected happens on stage? And as you're thinking about answering this question, also think about maybe a story or two that maybe you've got to share when things did go, kind of wrong, and you had to jump straight into action to make it better.
Okay, so there's a couple of things. Typically, this is from a graphics operator point of view as well. Obviously,
and we'll go into the speaker as well. We'll go into the speaker. Yeah. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so if the first thing I would like to iterate here is, if you are coming to speak at a live event and you have a rehearsal time booked, please come to the rehearsal. The reason for that is we're going to get you to click through your slides. We're going to make sure that what you're expecting to see on screen is on screen, and that the videos are playing, and that you're comfortable with where the screens are and how the clicker works, and just those simple things that everyone already thinks they know because they've spoken lots of times before, as it is for you. We get a feel for how that speaker presents, if they're quite competent, if they're a little bit nervous and they might need more support from us. So that's really important.
Another thing I've noticed for presenters is also their preview monitors, sometimes for their preview slides or preview notes or whatever it is when it's in presenter view. The slides can be so tiny. So if that's the first time you're seeing your presentation because you did miss your rehearsal, it could be that you didn't get a chance to actually adjust for whatever preview monitor or DSM you've got in front of you.
Yeah, and it's possible for us to change that layout as well per speaker. So some people might like to have a full screen of their current slide and a full screen of their next slide. Some people like to, like you say, have like a smaller image, but they might have supporting notes, which we can also change the size of. So coming to that rehearsal gives you a chance to customize that view so it works best for you. So another thing that I would say, now this is again because as a graphics operator you tend to get a lot of the last minute changes and it is quite high pressure once you're in live show. I would say if you've rehearsed with your PowerPoint deck, try not to make too many changes to it before the live show, just because we will have gone through it and made sure it all works. And if you resupply it 10 minutes before you go on, those checks aren't going to have time to get done. So we're kind of just crossing our fingers and hoping that it will work as we're expecting, but anything could have broken or been saved slightly differently when you've been editing it previously. So, you know, a little bit of a leeway with that makes a big difference for us.
So basically, don't go to your hotel room and start redesigning a brand new slide deck and then come up the morning of and be like, here's my updated slide deck. And it's a completely different slide deck altogether.
Yeah. You know, everyone understands a few little tweaks here and there or the odd slide inserted will take it away. But yeah, a completely new deck is horrifying for a backstage operator. So if you're a speaker, you're going through your presentation, it's all going spiffingly, and then suddenly the clicker doesn't work. It's like every speaker's nightmare. The clicker's not working. They've clicked a couple of times. The slide's not going forward. How should you deal with that if you're on
or
stage?
Maybe your slides don't match with your notes and you're like completely lost, like deer in the deer lights, right? Like deer in the spotlights. What shall you do? Freak out.
Yeah, so don't freak out. That's the worst possible advice. Don't freak out. I think another thing
the tech crew. It's their fault. This clicker doesn't work.
Yeah, try to avoid saying things like there seems to be a technical problem, because you know it doesn't look as professional as it could. So my advice would be take a breath. If the clicker's not working, your graphics op is listening in, we're paying attention, just revert to saying, next slide, please. It's not the most tidy way of doing things, but in that moment, it's going to cause you less stress than trying with a clicker you think isn't working or panicking about it. So just say, next slide, please. If your slides and notes are not matching up, the graphics op will likely notice this very quickly. So again, just give a second, take a breath, you know, just take a moment. It does seem like a long time when you're on stage, but that just a breath and compose yourself, begin again is normally enough time for the graphics operator backstage to notice, to resync the notes and the slides and to be listening out for your next slide. And then what will happen is they'll give somebody, a crew runner or a stagehand, another clicker, and they will discreetly run that out to you, sort of pass it up onto stage or pop it up on the lectern, and then you can start again, and hopefully no one's the wiser and it all looks professional and seamless for the people in the audience.
The opposite of that is trying to click fast forward 100 times and then backwards another 100 times and expect that everything will work, because that is never going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you click very, very fast, definitely they're going to come out of sync, and also the transitions are not going to play, and you're guaranteed to mess that up. And I think on that same point, I've made a note here as well, like if you've got a video embedded in your deck and perhaps you've clicked too fast and you've gone past it, don't try to go backwards, forwards. If, like we've discussed, if you've provided that as a source file, cue it verbally and it will come from another machine seamlessly. No one will ever know. Just make it obvious that you're queuing it. Otherwise, if you wait a moment and you just say, I'm going to show a video, your graphics tech will jump backwards to the slide before and then re-queue the video in your deck for you. So it's best to just pause, say that you want the video to go, and then don't click anything. And that will give the techs a chance to make it work for you.
Those are excellent tips, because I've seen one too many presenters that even if they're actually experts at presenting and they're seasoned presenters, and this is not their first rodeo, when it comes to being on stage, everyone gets a little nervous, right? So say you've done your rehearsal, you know how your presentation goes, you've even been there to test that the clicker works and your notes are in sync with your presentation. But I've seen this happen more times than I would like to, where if something just goes a little bit off, or one of the transition took just a moment too long, they would go super fast, like pushing on this clicker in the assumption that it's the clicker that doesn't go fast enough. And then what happens is, like, that's when they jump through a million of like slides, and then they try to go back, and then it doesn't go back as fast as they were hoping to. So it just turns into this like messy mess. And then the techs behind the scenes, they really want to be helpful and jump into action, but they're kind of lost. Like, I don't know where you're at this point. Like, stop clicking.
Yeah, so like when that happens, the only thing the tech can do really is turn the clicker off to stop you kind of going forwards, backwards. And I guess what would be really helpful from my point of view is if the speaker said, okay, so I'd like to go back to the slide with the red pie chart, or I'd like to go back to the slide that's talking about, you know, these 5 bullet points about so-and-so, because we can likely quickly skim over the slides, find the one you're talking about from a visual reference, and then we will reset you there so you can carry on.
So calling the slide number is not necessarily the best way, because sometimes in our preview in the back, we don't necessarily see the slide number, correct?
Yeah, not always. And depending on whether you're running Keynote or PowerPoint or another system, those numbers might not match up and tally. So yeah, the best way is just an easy visual representation. Like, hopefully you're able to say there's something you can spot, like this one has a picture of a whale on it, or I don't know.
I love it. Anything else that you'd like to add to this list of tips? Because Annette, I can tell you those are golden, and I'm pretty sure we've just saved, you know, quite a few techs from like sweating really hard behind the scenes, but also quite a few presenters from like really wanting to get better. It's just they don't necessarily have the tools or the knowledge how to, you know.
Yeah, so I've got a last one here for speakers as well, presenters. When you're handing over to the person after you, so when you get to the last slide in your deck, don't keep clicking. Let go, put the clicker down. Once you're on your last slide, whether that's a Q&A or a thank you slide, leave it there. Make your finishing verbals as you head off stage, and then just let the graphics op advance that on. Because what happens is you leave the stage, and then what's likely going to happen is the next presenter is going to come up with some music behind them, and the graphics op will move those slides on so they're in the right place for when the next speaker gets to stage. Likewise, if you are that speaker coming to stage and you don't see your slides on screen yet, don't panic, because we like to do it so it all happens at once. So you've got end of the music, person on stage, and the name slide appears. So we are there. You are going to get your slide. Just wait until you're on stage and you're ready to go, and it'll all be there at once.
From a technical point of view, this is a personal question. Do you prefer to have all the speakers' presentations in a master deck, one after another, so you can just advance, like you just said, from the last slide into the next slide? Or do you prefer to have one of the presenters' slides on one machine and then the next, you know, the Q-up slide onto a different machine, so that you can switch in between the two? As you know, the first presenter is done with this, you're going to switch straight to the next presentation on the next machine. What's your preference when it comes to running it?
So I've done it both ways in lots of different setups, and I think it depends on the show. If you've got all the presentations and you can stitch them together in one big deck, I like to do it in like a before coffee, a before lunch, and after lunch, and then an after the afternoon break. So maybe 4 chunks for a day's worth of event if there's a lot of slides in it. But then I did one recently that was a farmer event, and it was 10-minute presentation followed by a 5-minute Q&A with sort of 50 presentations in the day. So quite a lot, but very, very fast. Yeah. And that one I did on alternate machines because it was all on a server and those things were coming in last minute and things. So we just ran. And in that 5-minute Q&A, there was enough time then to search through and open the next one on another machine. So personally, I don't have a preference. I think the more I've got to do, the more focused I am. So sometimes it's better if it's a little bit harder because it keeps your head in the game.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, so before we get towards the ending of this fascinating conversation, I want to ask you, Annette, what do you feel like are some of the available opportunities for women in event productions, and what can be done maybe to change the status quo and give more opportunities to women technicians, or make it more attractive to more women to flourish in this field?
That's such a good question. I personally would love to see more AV techs that are females, and by that I mean people running like women running E2s and spiders, and more women in projection, because that typically seems to be very male dominated. I think, you know, you definitely see lots of women show callers, and I know a few brilliant female lighting techs and also sound ladies too, but I don't think I've ever
video
met
production, probably not as many, but there's definitely really good female V1s out there as well.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm not sure I've ever met a female E2 tech, actually.
So I am one of those. I am an A1 and an A2. Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that you could do that. Okay, fantastic. All right, well, you're my first then.
There you have it.
As for making it more attractive and getting more females into it, I think there just needs to be more education on the roles that are available. I honestly had no idea about any eventing roles before I fell into it after that first job, and then I've just grown as I've gone. So I think some way of making kids in school aware that this is a job, this is something you can do, you know, because so many kids are brilliant with technology now, making their own videos on their phones, amazing with social media, so they're all on laptops all the time. We should be able to entice some people in, surely, to more females into the roles more easily. But I don't know how we get that knowledge and that awareness out there. I
think through conversations like this one, it's a good step, you know, to bring up the awareness that there is a field in event production that a female can easily fill, even if she doesn't necessarily is the most technical, you know, when it comes, because, you know, when you go into positions like A1 and V1 and lighting as well, or system engineer or whatever it is, you know, projection is, like you mentioned, those positions tend to be quite technical. It's not something that you just walk into and be like, okay, now I'm going to run the show and know exactly what I'm doing, right? Yeah. But like you mentioned, like there's other position in which you can ease your way into and maybe advance to and grow into a different position as you work on those skills more, but you already put your foot in the door. I'm curious if, as we're coming to a close here, because this has been a very informing conversation, I loved every bit of it. I'm curious, from your learning experience and the experience that you've had over so many events, is there one piece of advice that you like to leave with any event planner, manager, producer out there that would be really helpful for them as, you know, they are planning their next event when it comes to the quality of their event production from a content management and graphics point of view?
Okay, yes. So I think there's two things that I would say, and it's not necessarily just from a graphics point of view, but generally remember that the crew are there because they want your event to succeed and they want the presenters to look good. So we want to do the best for you. If you're not sure at how something works, the best way to approach it, whether it can be done, come and ask the crew. Ask the person that's in the role that is relevant to the question you have. So if it's a sound related question, go and see the A1. If it's a graphics related question, you know, come and fire that at the graphics op. If it's stage management, go and see the stage manager, because we want to help you to do the best that you can do. And I think too many event teams that have never worked in a live event backstage assume they know how it works and then promise things to speakers or to the higher ups in their company. We'll do it like this because that's how they think it should be done. But from a technical point of view, there's normally a better way.
Or it could very much be very different based on the layout of the land and the gear used and the workflow, where it could potentially be close enough, but not really. It's just a little different. So knowing that is important so you don't, like you said, overpromise something that can't necessarily be delivered. And sometimes those turnarounds are really fast. You know, it's like, oh yeah, we can certainly do that. And you're like, 5 minutes before show, there's no way that we're going to be able to change things around so fast to accommodate for this, you know, major change in the workflow, if that's the case.
Yeah. And, you know, I think I used to work with a really great client who would say, he would ask for a lot, but he would always say, if this is a bad idea because it's too close to show, or you think that trying to achieve this is going to jeopardize the rest of the show, tell me. So if you have an open line of communication where, you know, your client can say to you, we'd really love it if we can have 1,000 streamers fall from the ceiling, but you're like, with 7 minutes to go, it's probably not going to be possible. You know,
exactly.
that's really great, because then you can offer other alternatives. But do you know what we could do? We could give you a brilliant light show as everyone comes in to create that excitement, you know. We're always going to have other ideas we can give that might, you know, create the wow factor, but just be open to somebody saying to you, this isn't really possible at this time, you know, and no, it's not because we don't want to, but it's just because some things take longer than others.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for all your insightful tips and tricks that you share with us today. Annette, where can our audience connect with you?
So I have a LinkedIn profile, which is under my name, Annette Jukes, so you can find me there. And I have a website, which is smallprintsdesign.com. They're the best places to find me.
Fabulous. Well, friends, this is it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and maybe you learned a thing or two about PowerPoint. I know I have, and also about Annette and the things that she's passionate about, the things that she's doing. Keep up with her events, especially on LinkedIn. And I just want to personally thank you for staying tuned all the way till the very end. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss our next episode, which is going to air every week on Friday. Annette, thank you very much. Have a very wonderful day, non-rainy day in UK. And I hope to see you soon on another event. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Events Demystified podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to review it, rate it, and share it with other event professionals that could benefit from it. Connect with us on social at Events Demystified Podcast. We would love to hear from you and what you're up to. If you'd like to learn more about Trifan Event Services and find out if we're a good fit in supporting your event, can we help your event be successful with a 20-minute free consultation? Link in the episode's notes. Thanks for tuning in.